Continue. Share desktop. Share hello world. Okay. Okay. Here's our syllabus for the course. Is it gonna go away? One interesting thing to do is to check these course objectives every now and then and see whether we've actually done any of that. If not, give me a hard time. Have we lost a few people?
Probably.
Okay. Looking around, where's all my students? Midterm is going to be worth 150 points. When's that? That will be week 8. So not next week, but the week after. And it'll probably be that Friday. So the day before spring break, basically. So haha. That way you're not thinking about econ over spring break. Right? Although if you really want to, there's like 3 podcasts out there. I'll be thinking about economics over spring break a lot. So, but you won't have to be thinking about the exam over spring break. About week 6, there's an article here from Kevin Greer, aka Angus. Yes?
Is the midterm going to be online or paper?
It's going to be in the classroom. The multiple choice will be on a computer, so you'll have to bring a computer. And I'm not sure if there's going to be any on paper in the classroom.
We just come in here and take it.
But you're going to come in here and take it, yeah. I've found that helps everybody to be a little more honest. Yes.
Is there gonna be a study guide for the midterm?
No. No study guide for the midterm, although I think there will be one for the final. Thanks a lot, Snow. But I'm maybe I can put together a study guide for the midterm. I don't know. That sounds like work to me. We should do that.
If you did that, I would be really grateful then.
So here's what you should be thinking. You stop for washing my dog again?
Yeah.
Here's what you can be thinking about. If you've been doing those end of chapter questions and you can get through them and figure it out without too much external help, then you should be okay. If you can get it through the learning curve questions for the multiple choice portions and you're understanding what's going on, you should be more or less okay. That fair? Maybe. Otherwise, I think that if once you've completed the learning curve assignment, you can open it back up again and there's more questions. So like completion means having achieved the number of points that you need, right? You can keep going on those learning curve questions and it'll continue to feed you questions, and that's another way to study. Finally, I guess, I don't know if the end of chapter questions that are on Achieve are different from the end of chapter questions as described in the textbook. So if you open up the book and there's end of chapter questions there that are not on Achieve, I haven't looked, but they might be. You can work through some of those. And I would recommend doing that with colleagues. Finally, for supplemental readings that might be assessed on the exam, the best way to handle that is to take notes while you're doing the supplemental readings. And as you're taking notes, try to invent questions that you think I might ask. So try to invent an essay question that you think might be provoked by the reading. And then ask a friend what question they came up with. And then answer your own question and your friend's question. So on my final macro exam one year, this was at the doctoral level, the professor said, come up with an interesting question and then answer it. You'll be graded both on the quality of the question and the answer. So that's fun times, right? Okay. So that's the Greer article, the economics of empirical growth. Right, this is or the empirics of economic growth. This is interesting because it shows what it is that we can know. It makes reference to Bob Solo's model, which we're learning right now, and the Nankin model that we're also going to be working towards. That's part of what's in chapters 8 and 9 as well. So this is all about economic growth. Kevin Greer is half of the pair, Munger and Greer, that keep the blog Kids Prefer Cheese, which is a fantastic economics blog. And Michael Munger is one of my economics heroes. He's at Wabash College today, actually, from Duke, visiting my former colleague at George Mason, fellow student Nicholas Snow, no relation. But anyway, Greer and Munger are a lot of fun. Totally relevant. I just posted to Canvas 2 chapters out of this book from Bill Easterly, The Elusive Quest for Growth. The total reading from these 2 chapters is about 40 pages. PDF is about 60 some odd pages long because I included like the front matter and the references and notes that are at the back. So obviously you don't need to read all of those, but reading those 2 chapters is going to be super helpful and important to understanding what's going on with macro and growth. Okay. Then we have, let's see, Fed watching. All right, so if I open this up, I've got Tyler's report for the day. And I think how can I make this work? My mic is off, so it should work. Let's try it. Hello, my name is Tyler. It's not going. Where's the other microphone? I came up with a solution. Give me a thumbs up. That turns on. Can you hear him?
Barely.
I can hear him from your laptop.
Alright, then what I'll have to do is find a way to post this so that everybody can listen to it later on. It's like 2 minutes long, but I'll share this with the class, and that will be our Fed watch for the day for Tyler. What else do I have on here? I think it's Natasha, who I don't think has provided a commentary on hers yet. I'll have to get in touch with her. Anything else? I have posted this link to the videos from Marginal Revolution University, and then so far the 2 video lectures from class this week. Okay. Any other logistical issues going on? Okay. We need to allow classroom thing to share. I just walked over to the economics office to get paper for the course, and I came across somebody has a former professor here, no longer here, gets this NDR reporter sent here, and there's an article here on monetary economics. We're going to be studying monetary economics a lot in the second half of the semester, so I'm going to read this with some interest and see if there's anything in it that's going to be valuable for our class. There's trends in earnings volatility among U.S. men. That looks like it might be interesting. Safety net programs and impacts on low-income families. Are any of these programs working? Interesting. The economic impact of climate change. Okay, does climate change matter? Asset demand systems and macro finance. Okay, what is it that people want? How does that affect our finances? Angus Card and Immons shared the Nobel Prize, but none of that was really about macro, so okay. So this will be interesting. I'll be looking into this and see if there's anything that I'm going to want to share with the class. Today, I'm going to go over some stuff that we're going to take out of this book, Modern Macroeconomics by Brian Snowden and Howard Vane. That's Milton Friedman. That's Robert Solow here, whose model we're studying right now. And I don't remember the names of what it is. I think that's Paul Romer, who's also involved in the growth side of things. So interesting stuff that I'm going to go over today, which is called the Harrod-Domar growth model. And which is not included in your textbook. Given that I'm already behind on what we're doing in the textbook, I thought I'd throw something else in that's not included in your textbook. But I think this is important. It'll help you understand what's happening in that easterly reading a little bit. And it's helpful in understanding how economists have tried to deal with the study of economic growth over time. And the short version of that is to say, we kind of neglected it at different periods of time. Why did economists neglect growth? Well, at first, growth was really slow. It was really hard to notice. And when economics really started to get up and running and grinding along, early on, Malthus was interested in economic growth. Ricardo was interested in economic growth, but then around the 1870s, we ran into something called the marginal revolution, which is where, of course, the blog gets its name. And there were three economists who sort of introduced the use of calculus into analyzing economic activity and discovered, hey, it turns out that human behavior, and not only the behavior of celestial bodies and physical bodies, but human action also can be described to some extent by the use of the calculus as developed by Leibniz and Newton. And so for 50 to 60 years there, we were all about like, well, let's apply this calculus to price theory to better understand what's happening around us and get a better understanding of price theory. And so if you've had your intermediate micro, you'll see this thing and be afraid. At least a little bit afraid. And you're thinking, oh my gosh, I might have to take a Lagrangian of this, and the answer is yes. But we're not going to do that in this class. Okay. What happened then is that because economists were busy trying to figure this stuff out, we didn't pay much attention to economic growth. And then we had a Great Depression. Right? And in the Great Depression, the major focus of attention was on if the economy were growing somewhat over time, why do things suck right now? Right? Why is economic performance so much below trend? Right? And that's what Keynes was interested in. We'll talk more about that in the future, of course. But so the concentration ended up being business cycles rather than growth. And so once we got out of the Great Depression, and I think it's important to note that another thing that happened here is that there was perhaps something of a decline in nationalism. So coming out of World War II, there was a decline in nationalism, in part fostered by the fact that, you know, instead of forcing the losers to pay for the war, like we did after World War I, we invited the losers back into the world economy and chose to participate with them. So we helped Japan to recover from the war. We helped Germany to recover from the war. We helped Italy a little bit to recover from the war, and we let Russia go off and do its own thing, which may be also a mistake, but there wasn't much we could do about it. It's hard to get along with Russians, as Ukraine is discovering. It has nothing to do with Russians. People are people everywhere. It just has to do with their institutions, which is maybe the conclusion of all of what I'm trying to get at here. Anyway, so one thing that people were interested in is, well, we helped Japan get back on its feet. We helped Germany get back on its feet. What about all the countries that were never on their feet to begin with? Right? What about countries that had never really risen above or closer to the higher quality of life as enjoyed by England and well, Germany between and before the wars, and America and the Netherlands and so on and so forth? How is it that countries become rich? And again, the important thing to remember here is that the puzzle is never why is it that some countries are poor? Not why are they poor? No, the question is, how are we so lucky? And how is it that we ever got out of being super duper poor, given that almost all of humanity for almost all of time was extremely poor, the last 200 years, you know, being the exception to humanity over all time. So economists started digging into this, and they said, okay, well, let's use the models that we have and let's think about it as best as we can. And so they said, okay, well, the output that we have today gets used in consumption, and some of it goes to savings. Well, we're going to make a very simple version of this. We're going to say, if something gets saved, it goes to investment. So we're assuming perfect loanable funds markets, such that every dollar that gets saved gets invested, and gets invested because we're dealing with this in the aggregate, and everything gets invested essentially the same way, right? So we made a whole bunch of GDPs. We consume some of them. We save some of them. The GDPs that we save, we use to invest. What are we going to invest in? Same thing we always invest in: capital. So Y gets distributed between consumption and investment. Okay, and production is some function of capital. Capital is important in the production process. So then we're going to say, okay, well, how much capital do we have this year? And how much capital do we have this year given the amount of capital that we had last year? Well, we can say that of the capital that we had last year, some of it wore out, and the amount that we have left is the difference between, right, the amount that we had and the amount that wore out. That's how much we have left. So the capital that we had minus the amount that depreciated, that's how much we have left. So that's how much capital we have, but also we bought some more capital. So we invested in some capital. So all investment goes to capital, yes?
After the capital, the KT in the parentheses, it's 1 minus.
Del.
Okay.
It's a circle with the tail and a hat. It's the lowercase version of that, right? Is there a Trident house on campus? The Trident here? No. Okay. Which Greeks on campus use the Del? Any? Are there any fraternities or sororities that have a delta in them on campus?
Yeah.
Okay. when I worked in Durham, there was a Trident sorority that would invite the small boarding school where I worked over every Easter for an Easter egg hunt. We would host that. That was a lot of fun. It was a good opportunity. Okay. How much gets saved for every period? We're going to say that that's some savings rate of what gets produced. And so, of all that we produce, some of it gets saved. So then the amount that gets produced gets split between consumption and the amount of output that gets saved. And we remember that this is S and S is I, so Y of T equals C of T plus I of T. And so I of T is equal to S Y of T. And we're just kind of defining things, right? We're just defining things right now. Then we're going to say, okay, well, given a certain amount of capital, right? What is the amount of GDP that exists that is being held in the form of capital? What's the ratio of capital to output? Okay, and we're going to call that V. I'm just going to use V as a variable that stands in for this to simplify some of this. We could rewrite this as the amount of capital is equal to some share of output. The amount of capital that exists is some percentage of output. And V is also going to be equal to the rate of change between capital and output. We're going to assume that this is constant. That as the economy grows, the share of it that is going to capital is constant. It stays the same. That's an interesting assumption. Maybe not always true, but that's what we're going to assume. So what would that mean in practical terms, right? That if we produce more next year, given that we have the same savings rate as we have had before, then of what we produce next year, we're going to save the same rate of what gets produced as what we saved last year. So the change in amount of capital is going to be the same as the rate of change in the amount of output, right? So, okay, this remains constant. Okay, what are we going to do with this? Let's play with it a minute. We can say that this V of Y term is the same as capital. So we can set up an equation that's like capital. It's going to be similar to this equation. Capital times T plus 1 is equal to capital times T, 1 minus D plus I over T, okay? We're going to replace the K's with VY's. So we say Vy at T plus 1 is equal to Vy times T plus 1 minus this delta, and then this IT, you'll remember, is the same as SYT. So we're going to put plus SYT. Why did we do all of that, Snow? Well, because now we have Y, so we can collect terms. We have everything expressed in terms of output in two different periods, output today and output next year. So we can collect our terms. These are the algebraic, right, manipulations attempting to help us think through conclusions. We're going to take this to the next step. I'll divide everything by V. then you get y of t plus 1 equals y of t times 1 minus delta plus s over v times y of t. Okay, so we got y of t plus 1 by itself. What can we read this in words? The amount of output tomorrow is the amount of output last year multiplied by 1 minus the depreciation rate. Okay. Plus the savings rate divided by the ratio of capital to output multiplied by the total amount of output. Okay. Getting confusing now. Not just now, so it's been confusing. We're going to collect our YTs. Y of t plus 1 equals y of t. Actually, let me distribute it. Y of t times 1 minus del y of t plus s over v y of t. Now I'll collect terms. Why did I not just collect terms before? Oh, I see why. Here we've got a y of t by itself multiplied by 1. So we're going to set that aside for half a moment. And then we distributed this y of t through this expression. Now we're going to collect these y of t's. Are you following my algebraic acrobatics here? Now I'm going to subtract this from both sides. I'm left with y of t plus 1 minus y of t is equal to y of t okay. Now I'm going to divide both sides by y of t. All right, and as a shortcut, I'm just going to cancel these two. And what's this? What is that expression describing?
Change of the output.
Say again?
Change of the output.
Yeah, the rate of growth of output, right? The percentage change of output. Last year I made 5 cookies. This year I made 5 cookies. Last year I made 4 cookies. Divided by 4 cookies, I got 1 more cookie than I had last year. My rate of growth is 25% cookies. Yes? Okay. So this is the rate of growth. In other words, this is real GDP, right? The percentage of real GDP growth.
Could you squish the paper up a little? We can't see.
Thank you. Okay, and I'm just left with this over here. So growth is equal to S over V minus del. What does that mean? Well, how do we get growth to increase? How do we get a higher rate of economic growth? We could increase the savings rate. If we increase the savings rate, economic growth should increase. Right? 5, because that's in the numerator, and as the numerator gets bigger, right, then this gets bigger. What else could we do? We could decrease the rate of depreciation. If we make things that last longer, then economic growth will increase. And whatever kind of capital is we're buying, if we're buying capital that depreciates slower, economic growth should go up. There's some irony to that because for a long time, Well, what's one major form of capital that gets purchased? Computers. Right? Computers. And for a season there, computers depreciated really fast. The rate of improvement of processors was so fast that your laptop would be obsolete in 2 years. So the rate of depreciation actually accelerated for laptops. Although, what else happened at the same time? The price of laptops fell dramatically. So that's interesting. You buy 3 laptops, newer ones, better ones. So capturing the rate of depreciation is complicated. But I've talked a little bit before about how, tires are a form of depreciation, and the quality of tires are better than they were before. They last longer. And other forms of capital last longer. So the rate of depreciation has perhaps been going down in some areas, so we've been getting some economic growth. The last implication here is that if this V term goes down, then growth increases. But what's that V term again? What does that V term mean? The V term is about the share of output that is capital. Capital share of output. If you decrease the amount of capital and increase the amount of output, or decrease the amount of capital required to get a certain amount of output, then overall economic growth is going to increase, which is basically to say that the capital that you do have is more productive. How do you get more productive capital? Better capital, right? You improve the technology of your capital. So better capital helps to get you there. Okay. So this was a model without solo. Notice what I did not do. I did not do this. Right? I didn't draw a production function. I didn't talk about marginal productivity of capital. In all this, there's no marginal productivity of capital. It's a relatively simpler model than this. Right? There is no depreciation on it like this. There's no savings on it like this. This is before, right, the application of the production function to our analysis of economic growth. What came out of all that? This was the best model that we had for a long time. What came out of all that? Well, given these basic implications of that model, when Western and developed countries wanted to help developing countries to improve, they said, do these things. Okay, how do I do these things? Well, you have to increase your savings rate. You've got a desperately poor country where people are barely living at the level of subsistence. And you're telling them, consume less, spend more money on capital. And they're kind of like, consume less? We're already dying of hunger. Consume less? Then the alternative implication was, well, if we really want to help those countries, we have to send them capital. They can't afford it on their own. So we'll give them some capital, and that'll help them to get out of poverty. And we did this for a long time. We sent capital to developing countries for a long time in an attempt to help them grow. It was well-intentioned. What kind of capital did we send? Sometimes we would send them tractors. Right? Sometimes we would send them tractors, but what's funny is you send them a tractor without gasoline, and it's a nice lawn ornament. Right? It looks pretty on the lawn, or it doesn't. It takes up space. Not very helpful. Great. Okay, so we decided, sending them capital that works in developed countries probably isn't worthwhile. We should let them choose what capital that they want to buy. They probably know better than we do. So we sent them money to buy capital, and the dictators bought guns with it instead. Shocking. Who'd have guessed that that's what would happen? Bummer. Okay. The implications then were that we tried to set economic policies based upon this model for a long time, and they did not have the intended results. Paul Romer, I was reading this today, and he said, of all the policy questions concerning growth, the most fundamental is whether there are any policies that an omniscient, omnipotent, benevolent, social planner could implement to raise the welfare of all individuals in an economy. Can you read it? Zooming help. Okay. Of all the questions concerning growth, the most fundamental is whether there are any policies that an omniscient, omnipotent, benevolent social planner could implement to raise the welfare of all individuals in an economy. My response is no. Because he's got a Nobel Prize that I don't, but it's okay. The most fundamental question is if such policies could be known and would be incentive compatible for an imperfect human being to implement. We don't have perfect people. People who are in government are not necessarily perfect. Right? We don't get the option of having perfect people who are omniscient, omnipotent, and benevolent. You might have somebody who's omniscient, but if they were, chances are that they're also going to be benevolent or poor. It's not incentive compatible. Okay. The real search needs to be for policies that even corrupt people would choose to implement. That's consistent with real humanity and robust to nature, as David Hume would say. But maybe I'm just pessimistic. The recent history of politics in Muncie suggests otherwise. So we tried that route. We tried to just increase the amount of capital in foreign aid, and it had the results that the political economists would expect, but not necessarily that the macroeconomists trying to do growth theory would expect. And then we have to have something like the political economy macroeconomic growth, and think about that. In getting there, we're going to think about, that was Paul Romer there, he got better. He didn't continue to make that mistake. He started to think of other ideas. So we're going to be interested in people like Paul Romer, who's at NYU, Ann Olson, who passed away some time ago. He was at Maryland. Darren Acemoglu. Have I mentioned Darren Acemoglu to you before? The jokes about Darren Acemoglu are similar to the ones that they make about Chuck Norris. What's under Chuck Norris's beard? Another fist. When Chuck Norris does push-ups, he doesn't do push-ups, he does earth downs. The joke about Darren Acemoglu is that while you were stating his name, he published another paper. That's how Darren Acemoglu does. This is how Darren Acemoglu. All right, and then there's Deirdre McCloskey. Who you all will know. She's retired now, but she wrote the Bourgeois Dignity series. I call her NTD because she's been so important in my own understanding. She's visited here too. She's been here to talk. Okay. Let's move on from that to something more fundamental. I've got 3 minutes. I can say one thing. All right. We know that economic growth looks like this, not like this. And so when I asked you to do your GDP graphing project, which I will someday grade, I asked you to take the log of this line so that it turned into this line, right? And you've learned this in other classes, but let me prove it to you. If you take y of t is equal to y 0 EG of t. This is an exponential graph. This is an exponential function. So if output today is equal to output yesterday, but having grown some, right? And G is our rate of growth, and T is the amount of time between periods for growth, okay? And then we ask, how long would it take at a given growth rate for the output of an economy to double? Then we put a 2 in front of this and say, how long would it take for the economy to double from what it was at previously? Let me know if you're following. Right? Given an exponential growth rate over some number of periods, how many periods would it take for the overall output to double from what it originally was? Okay, then we take the natural log of both sides, right? Why? We want this to be 2 times what it was previously. So we've got 2y, 0 equals y 0. So I can cancel the y's. So I get 2 equals e gt. And I take the natural log of both sides. I get the ln of 2 is equal to g times t. Okay. And then if I want to know, given a certain growth rate, how many periods would I have to wait? I can solve for t, and t would be equal to the ln of 2 over g. And doing calculators, we find that the ln of 2 is equal to 0.7. And we say t equals 0.7 over g. Well, what does that mean? It means that 0.7. If you have a growth rate of 0.1, 1% growth rate, right? Your economy will double. Your economy will double in 70 years. And if we in general, in place of g, put just a percentage, then we can multiply this term by 100, multiply both by 100, then time equals 70 divided by g, expressed in terms of hundreds, or in terms of percents, and you have the rule of 70. Right? So if you have a growth rate of 1%, your economy will double in 70 years. If you have a growth rate of 2%, your economy will double in 35 years, right? If you have a growth rate of 7, your economy will double every 10 years, right? That's been China over the last decade or two. This is where America generally is, between 2 and 3% real GDP growth over time. You guys have seen this before, but now you've seen the math. Why? Because math. So you can get a comparison amongst nations, right? All starting at the same level of output of 1,000. If you have a 0% growth rate, they're all going to be the same over time. Right? If you have a 1% growth rate, then in 10 years, this economy will be at 1640 real GDP. If you manage to get 5% real growth, it's 11,000 GDP after 50 years. This is what's happened in the West. That we've had very high levels of economic growth. In countries that are poor, they've had very low rates of economic growth. I haven't explained to you why, though. More on that later. See you later.
Yeah, I was like straight out of left field.